I'm delighted now to be joined also by Nick von Westenholz. Nick is Director of Trade at the Great National Farmers Union, of which I always put my cards on the table. I am a member as well, but I'm entirely impartial in these matters, but I'm a member and a fan. Were you able to hear what Andrew was just saying then, Nick?
Yes, I did. Yes, I heard.
Absolutely fascinating. So I'm going to nick two bits out of that before I ask you the other questions I wanted to ask you anyway. There was a bit of a clash in the House of Commons between the Prime Minister and Sir Ed Davey, leader of the Lib Dems, about farming policy. And George Eustace then went very public saying, no, we're doing all of the right things. I mean, just listening to Andrew, it seems to me that there is more that the government could be doing, not by way of subsidy, this, that and the other, but recognising the core importance to this country of our farming community and our capacity to produce our own food.
Yeah, I mean, he's absolutely right. And it's something we've been saying for a long time, which is, you know, as the government designs a new agricultural policy, and it's had to do this because we left the EU and so we're no longer subject to the common agricultural policy. For us, at the heart of that had to be a way of supporting farmers, yes, to do environmental work, yes, to farm more sustainably, but crucially, to still be producing food. And it's not straightforward, but you need a policy that presses farmers to be food producers as well as guardians of the environment. And I think Andrew's concern, which he expressed so well there, is that it's leaning too far in one direction, and that farmers are being encouraged to produce what the government refers to as public goods, but not necessarily to produce food. And we would argue, well, a secure supply of food security, and domestic food production being an important part of that is a public good as well. So the key is to find ways to incentivize farmers and to assist farmers in producing food, but producing it in a sustainable and environmentally friendly way.
The expert on it, because you focus on trade at the NFU, but it seems to me, listening to what you said and what Andrew said before, we are heading to make exactly the same mistakes that the government are now trying to put right on energy policy, and that is throwing away the capacity of what they call energy security, i.e. producing our own gas, our own oil, our own wind farms and what have you. We're throwing away the possibility to have food security. Everything possible should be done to enhance our capacity to make our own food and feed our own people.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And we're not arguing that every single morsel of food consumed in the UK should have been produced on UK shores. I mean, clearly there are some foods that we can't produce here anyway. And you need a diverse supply base to be really food secure. But at the moment, we only produce about 60% of what we eat here in the UK. And that is pretty low historically. At times, that figure has been over 80%, even in recent decades. So for us, that needs to be reversed. We need to have the capacity to produce more food. And it's interesting because these discussions, they seem to come around every 10, 15 years or so when there's a big crisis. And the awful events in Ukraine at the moment have catalyzed that. We go back 15 years or so to 2008, 2009. There were food price spikes. Then there were riots, which happened because of that all around the world, North Africa most notably. And then you get a sort of a year or two of the government suddenly taking domestic food production very seriously. And then slowly they forget again. And we find ourselves where we are. So what we really need to do is to learn the long-term lessons of what's going on now. As I say, not take a policy approach that says everything we eat has to be produced on these shores, but take a policy approach that recognises farmers have a dual role. They look after the countryside and the environment, but they are food producers. First and foremost, that's what they do, and that's what they're proud to do.
I agree with that completely, first and foremost being the crucial part of it. The final question, Nick, and as I said to Andrew, I genuinely love chatting to farmers and people who we have a little holding mainly for equestrian sport, but therefore we need people who fertilise and cut and bale hay and all the rest of it. And we were having a chat the other day, and my wife came back absolutely furious about it, and it was about rapeseed oil because of the shortage of Ukrainian oils coming in. And she said that she'd been told by a farmer who was up for producing lots of rapeseed because it produced oils, that we were importing stuff from Australia that was cheaper but used certain treatments to enhance the crop that we were not allowed to use here in this country, so we were cutting off our nose to spite our face in terms of rapeseed oil. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. We banned a class of insecticides here in the UK some years ago to be used on oilseed rape. So they're no longer used on oilseed rape, which has actually meant there has been a quite considerable reduction in the amount of oilseed rape grown in the UK. But that is a UK law, essentially, that applies only to UK producers. So if producers overseas, like, for example, in Australia, have used those insecticides, which they're allowed to use over there, and the residues on them have to be below a certain level when they're imported, but there's nothing to stop them using those insecticides, then that's fine. We can import that oilseed rape, and indeed we do. And it's a great point, because it's an example of where UK policy is asking us, on the one hand, to compete with farmers all over the world who have access to technologies and to different standards than we do here. And yet we're not being given the domestic policy support to do so. So it's a good example.
Great talking to you and Andrew before you, Nick. There's a good agenda there for a chat with George Eustace, who's a nice guy, and I like him a lot. So we'll try and get him on the programme and run through some of those points. But for the time being, Nick von Westenholz, Director of Trade at the National Farmers Union, my thanks. Keep in touch. Thank you very much indeed.